Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, 27a.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody puts a kad barrel in a public area. Somebody came along and tripped over it and broke it. He's exempt from paying damages because the barrel does not belong there. You don't have a right to put your barrel in a public area. Let's say the person was damaged by the barrel. I'm sorry. The owner of that barrel is chayav in the damages. Again, because he had no right to keep it there. Now the Gemara starts with an interesting observation. Pasach bekad v'tzayim b'chavis. The Mishnah calls it a kad, and then it says the owner of the chavis. Kad and chavis. And so it's an interesting thing that we call a kad a chavis, and a chavis we call a kad. They both mean a barrel, or whatever. One I think is made out of wood, and one is an amphora. And we find similarly in other Mishnayos, we find the same thing. Zeba b'chavisa v'zeba b'kurosai. Two people are meeting each other. One guy's carrying a barrel, the other guy's carrying a beam. And what do you think happened? Nish v'kadash shalzeh v'kurosai shalzeh. The beam crashed into the barrel. Okay, so the guy is carrying a chavis, and what happened? Nishbra kadai, his kad broke. Again, same words are used. Okay. Pasach b'chavis v'sayim b'kad. We started with chavis and we end with kad. Utnana, we have another brayse. Zeba b'chavis shel yayin v'zeba b'kad shel yayin. We'll learn about the specifics of each mission when we get to it. This guy's carrying a barrel, a chavis of wine, of wine, v'zeba b'kad shel dvash, and this guy is carrying a kad of dvash, of honey. And what happened? Nistga chavis shel dvash. The guy with the honey barrel, there was a leak in his barrel. So what happened? The guy, honey, it seems, is more expensive than wine.
Oh.
At least it was more expensive. I'm not sure what it is today.
Yeah, interesting. Depends on the wine.
Yeah, I guess it's fair observation. I presume actually that honey probably is more expensive than a cheap wine. Okay. So what happened? So the guy spilled out the wine so that he can rescue the honey. As it's oozing out of the barrel, it can go into his barrel. So the lawyer is ein lo el. He only gets his payment. In other words, he gets the value of he gets his value of labor. He's not entitled to claim the value of the lost wine. Regardless, pasach b'kad v'sayim b'vash. The guy who started off with the kad of honey ends up being called the chavis of dvash. Right, one guy was carrying a kad of dvash, and then nizdig chavis shel dvash, and the chavis of dvash broke. Clearly, again, we're using the same word. The two different words to describe the same thing. Rav Papa says hainu kad hainu chavis is the same thing. What's the difference? The mega chamemkar. If a guy sells somebody a chavis of dvash, he can provide him with a kad. And the same thing is true in the opposite. If a guy sells a kad of dvash, you can provide him with a chavis. So the Gemara says, one second. If we're talking about a town where they're both different sizes, and each size is called by its appropriate name. The size of kad is called a kad, the size of chavis is called a chavis. So the Gemara says, halai karla. They don't use the same name, therefore you'd have to give him what the normal amount would be for either a chavis or kad. So the Gemara says, we're talking about a scenario, a town where most people call a kad and a chavis a chavis. The economy, the kar chavisa kada, or the kada chavisa. There are people in town though that call a kad a chavis and a chavis a kad. People confuse the names. I would think we should go based on the majority. The general rule is the eina holchem b'momen achar harayv. When it comes to monetary matters, we don't go by majority. Okay. Somebody came along, so the barrel's in the public area, somebody came along and broke it, he's exempt. So Gemara says, "My potter, why is he exempt? He should have looked where he was going, Amazon, and and walk around it." So we have a few different responses here. Amr debei Rav Mishmed Rav, the Mimalash Sarabim Kula Chavias. According to Rav, the entire public area was filled with chavisas. So what do? You break them and you go and you do what you have to do. It's nothing wrong. The guy is not entitled to put his things there, and if you need to break your way through, then do that. We'll get to this discussion of if you're thinking about vigilantism, that's the next discussion. Vigilantism.
There you go.
We'll get to it. Okay. Shmuel Amar Ba'Fela Shana. Shmuel has a very simple resolution. What it's talking about, it's dark. Dark meaning no light whatsoever. So the guy has no way of knowing what's there, and he turns out he knocks it down. It's just too bad. Rabbi Yochanan says, "B'Karen Zavius." Yeah, so basically it was in a public area, but it was at a sharp corner. So the guy sort of bumped into it and didn't realize it was there until it was too late. Amar Papa says the mission is either like Shmuel or like Rav. I'm sorry, Shmuel like Rabbi Yochanan. Either like Shmuel like Rabbi Yochanan. The Ika Rav, my area nitgal afil shavarnami. According to Rav, why does the mission use the word nitgal, meaning he tripped over it, even if he shattered it intentionally? He took his shotgun and started knocking down the barrels one at a time. It's perfectly acceptable. The guy has no business. Amar Rava, so Zvid responds, "You're right. The mission could have spoken about breaking it. The reason why nitkal is used, nitkal meaning you tripped over it, is because of the end of the mission. Let's say the guy trips over it and breaks it, but he hurts himself. It's the owner of the barrel is chayev because he put a borbush or sarab. He put a stumbling block in a public area. Now this would all be true if he stumbled over it, but if he shattered it and then tripped over it, it doesn't work that way. You sort of created your own stumbling block. The owner would not be chayev. My time he sort of damaged himself. So that's why the continuation niskal. So that's why the first part of the Mishnah also refers to tripping. The truth of the matter is that even if he shattered it intentionally, it's perfectly fine. Amr le Rav Abba Rav Ashi. So Rav Abba says Rav Ashi, Haki Amri Marava Mishmed Ragula. 1 second. Amr le Rav Rav Ashi. So Rav Abba says Rav Ashi, Haki Amri Marava Mishmed Ragula. Fish ein darken shlabnei Adam le Hizbayin B'drachim. This is what they say in Israel in the name of Ula. 1 second. Okay, see, he says very simple resolution. People don't look where they're going. So it's not such a question. He should have looked. No, he shouldn't. Yeah, exactly. He should not have looked. There's no reason for him to look. He continues walking. Something's there, it's too bad. Have Uvda ben Ardoi. There was a story in Ardoi, the Chai of Shmuel. And Shmuel required the guy to pay for the broken barrels. Okay, so there's a story like this in Pumbedisa. The Chai of Rava, and Rava made him pay. So Gemara says, Bishlam Shmuel, Kishmaitze. Shmuel makes sense. What was Shmuel's opinion? When did the guy trip over the barrels in the pitch black? That's why he's exempt. But if he does it by daytime, he's chayav. That makes sense. Ela Rava Laimik Shmuel Svirle. Does Rava hold like Shmuel that we're talking? The Mishnah is talking about it. Where it's dark. Or say Amar Papa Karen or the Atzra Havel. The Kivin B'Shus Ka'av the Iboyle Yune Umezel. Okay, so what would be a good example of this? Karen the Atzra is the line for the In-N-Out burger, right? It goes around the block.
Oh, okay.
You don't really, if you're waiting in line at McDonald's, you wait in line in the drive-through. It's not like you can't drive around the block to But it's sort of understood that when you have a business, sometimes the traffic is going to be backed up into the street. So Karna Datzra is sort of a wine press, not a wine press, an olive press. Thank you, an olive press. And sometimes there's not enough room for all the olive barrels to be stored on site. So they're allowed to store it next to the press, even though it's in the public area. If you go by the some of the supermarkets in Brooklyn before Pesach, you'll see that like they freely use the parking spaces for pallets. You know, it's not exactly legal. You don't own the parking spaces, but it's sort of understood that if you get a large order and it takes you 10 minutes to put it into your storage, you know, you'll store it outside, and that's sort of understood.
Flexible.
What? Rather flexible, of course. Yeah. The kingdom of Shishkav, the Yomi Bava. So therefore, Rav basically said that you do. Rava said you do have to pay. Just because the guy is storing his pallets in the street, for a couple minutes, doesn't mean that you have a right to sort of just trip over them and knock them down. You should have realized this is what happens outside a supermarket, and it's fine. Rav Chisda says to Rav Nachman the following question: Hari Amru, they said, L'Kuva Sholosh. Okay, if a guy kicks his friend, he has to pay a penalty of 3. Ulabeita, 1 second. How do they translate what's our kaiva? Kaiva is with the knee. Okay, so he needs a guy. He needs the guy 3. Ulabeita, if he kicks him with the front, Chamish 5. L'snaikeres, if he hits him with a saddle of a donkey, Sholosh, 13 coins. The panda demora, the hands,
Handle of the shovel.
the shovel handle. He beat somebody else. The kufina demora, or the shovel itself. What's the story? What's the penalty? So this is Rav Chisda sending this question to Rav Nachman. These are our standard penalties for assault. Like, what do you charge if the guy beats somebody with a shovel? Basically, Shalach Lei, he says to him, Chisda, Knasa Kamagvas Bubble. He says to him, Rav Nachman, I guess, Rav Nachman says to Rav Chisda, are you charging a penalty for a knas, basically, in Bavel? The law is, like we saw before, knas can only be paid in Israel. So you have no right to give these set penalties. I'd like to hear the details of the story. What was the specifics of the story? Shalach Leis, he says to him, okay.
These from intentional and non-intentional?
It appears to be intentional. Okay, so now we get into the story of vigilantism. What happened? There was a vigilante. There were 2 people. They owned a water well or a water pit, a cistern. Thank you. The Kol Yom have a doli chad minayu. Every day they took turns. That was the agreement. Each one would use it every other day to water their property. So one guy came along and he was watering his property on a day that wasn't his. The other guy says to him, it's my day. He didn't listen. So he took a shovel and he beat him. So this is the story. Again, so the guy took matters into his own hands. He became his own judge. Again, so let's review the story. So Rav Chisda has all these set prices. You beat a guy with your knee, you beat a guy with your foot.
Right.
What if you do it? You beat a guy with a shovel? Rav Nachman says, why exactly are you charging these fixed amounts? So Rav Nachman says, this is the story. The 2 guys that fought over the well, one guy was trying to steal, so the other guy beat him with a shovel. So Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman says to him, the guy beat him with a shovel, he pays 0. Mea pandi bepanda lamachi. He should beat him 100 times with a shovel. Afilu lamanda Amar loy avin inishtina l'nafshei. So there's a famous debate here: is a man able to enforce his own judgment? Even according to the opinion that says you cannot enforce your own judgment, but makom seida avin inishtina l'nafshei. In a place where there's a potential loss, such as where the guy is taking water that day, it's a guaranteed loss, then everyone agrees that you could judge for yourself. Take matters into your own hands, as they say in English. The Itmar, like we learned, Rabbi Yehudah Amar Rabbi Yehudah says you can't take matters into your own hands. If Nachman Amar Ovid in Shtina Nafshay, Rav Nachman says you could. Hechad ikap say the Kulam Alay Pligi the Ovid in Shtina Nafshay. Everyone agrees when there's an imminent loss, you are allowed to take matters into your own hands. Ki Pligi, what's the debate? Hechad Alekap Seda, where there's no loss. Rabbi Yehudah Amar Alay Ovid in Shtina Nafshay. The Kivin the Lekap Seda lays a Kamedaina. Rabbi Yehudah says you can't take matters into your own hands. Go to a court and get a court judgment. If Nachman says Ovid in Shtina Nafshay, the Kivin the Bedina Ovid Loy Tarach. If Nachman says because he's following the law, he doesn't have to go to court. He can do what he needs to do. You hear an interesting story. There was try to give not give too many details here. There was a very wealthy person that bought a synagogue in Israel, Jerusalem, and at that point the leader of the synagogue was a great respected rabbi, very well respected. So he said to them, he said, "Look, as long as your rabbi's alive, you could use the synagogue free of any charge or rent, and I'm not going to charge you anything." And that was the agreement, and that went on for 25 years until he passed away. I was in Israel at the time that rabbi passed away, and sure enough, the yeshiva, the rabbi's yeshiva, they decided they don't want to continue. They don't want to pay rent, so they took him to. They decided they're going to bring him to Beis Din. So one of the prestigious dayanim, the judges in Jerusalem, Rabbi Asher Weiss, sent the guy a letter and said to him, "There's no reason for you to go to Beis Din. Just go to court." He says, "But what are they going to do? They're going to go to Beis Din and they're going to try to get you to compromise." He says, "You don't need to compromise. It's yours. It's fair and square. There's no question about who owns it. It's yours. It's yours. Just don't go to Beis Din. Go to court. You have my permission." And they're trying to steal something from you. Other than Yishtina Nafshay, do what you need to do to keep it. Yeah, that's what he did. The yeshiva has to pay rent now. Maser of Kana.
Rabbi, arguing against type of my own philosophical self-interest. We're talking about a water system, and I guess there's only two possibilities here. Either the water is a clearly limited, finite system.
So
in which case, if that guy steals his water, an attorney really is hurting the other guy, or it's a case where there's so much water, maybe the guy is breaking the law, taking from the other guy, but it almost doesn't matter.
So it's
actual literal damage. So maybe that guy doesn't have the right to take law into his hands.
Yeah, and well, I'm not so familiar with the water tables and how these things work. From what I understand, it's a cistern, which fills, let's say, overnight, and every single day the entire cistern is used to water each guy's garden, property, whatever's needed. So if the other guy takes it, if he runs to court, then what's going to happen? What's the court going to do? The water's already used.
The question, Rabbi, is the cistern related to the brother?
Maser of Kahana. So Rav Kahana says, "Ben bagbag oimer al tikonas l'chatz chaverach alitel es shaloch." Ben bagbag says, don't go into the courtyard of your friend to take that which belongs to you. Shaloi b'rshus, without permission. Shematira olaf ganav, so that he doesn't think that you're a robber. El shvar shinav, go break his teeth. Va'amar lo shaliani naitel, and tell him that I'm taking what belongs to me. Okay, now over here, the guy has something, the neighbor has something that belongs to you. So why can't you go in and take it?
Right.
So Amalai and Bagba clearly says that Ben Bagba clearly says you could take it with force, which is a question on the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah says you can't use force; you have to go to the court. Ben Bagba says you could. So Gemara says Amalai imcha Ben Bagba yichidahu. Rabbi Yehudah says to Rav Nachman that but you and Ben Bagba, you're both individual opinions, but actually the consensus follows my opinion. The rabbis disagree. They say over here it appears there's no imminent loss, and therefore go to court and take it. Rav Yanai says actually Ben Bagba agrees to Rav Yehudah. My shvar, what does it mean to break his teeth? Bedin, in court. So the Gemara doesn't like this resolution. If that's what it's referring to, the court should be telling him it belongs to him. Not the guy. The Brisa speaks in first person. This belongs to me. That's not the statement that's made to the guy. The court speaks on the victim's behalf and says that stuff is his. So the verbiage is completely off. If that was the opinion, Gemara says, "Kasha, you're right. It remains difficult." Okay, more in the discussion. You have one ox that's sort of literally on top of the other one. They're not copulating. One is intending on killing the other one. So the owner of the bottom ox comes along. He takes out his ox. And in that process of rescuing his own ox, the top one fell down and died. Potter, the owner who did this is exempt. My love, what are we talking about here? Like Apseda. The top shore was a shore muad. It was a habituated animal. Now, in a habituated animal killing another animal, what happens? Full payment. So there is no loss here. If it was a shore tam, then potentially the guy's going to lose half the value of his animal. So he'd be entitled to say, 1 second, I don't want to lose half the value of my animal by a shore tam. I'm saving my animal. That would make sense. But over here, as a shore muad, he's going to have to pay for it anyway. So there's no psei, there's no loss. It's true that you'll lose the animal, but you'll get the money instead. So what right does he have to throw off the top ox?
Two oxen.
Yeah. So pretty confident fellow. Yeah. Keep in mind, he didn't have an AR-15 slung over his shoulder, right?
Didn't have what?
He didn't have an AR-15 slung over his shoulder. Okay, so Malab like Abseda. Okay, there's no loss, and yet we still see, what do we see from here? A person is permitted to be a vigilante to save his property, even though technically speaking, the guy won't suffer financial loss. His animal is worth 1,000, I'll get paid 1,000. So Gemara says, we're talking about a naive animal. Jacob said that there's a potential loss, and as we said, everyone agrees that where there's a potential loss, then you could act as your own judge. If that's the case, let's look at the second half of the Mishnah. Instead of saving his animal, he pushed the upper animal down. He's liable. If the animal's naive, why is he chayav for throwing off the top animal? He's saving his animal. Instead of saving it by pulling out the bottom, he's just pushed off the top. There's a potential loss. He's fully, just like the guy in the well was fully entitled to take the shovel and beat his neighbor up. This guy is fully entitled to take the upper ox, the aggressing ox, and do what it needs to do to prevent that damage to his animal. And if that means that the upper animal died, so be it. So why is the guy chayav? So the Gemara says because he shouldn't have killed it. He should have saved his own animal without pushing the top animal off. I presume that saving his own animal would be less risky than throwing the top animal down. Toshma. Okay, next attempt. A guy fills his friend's property with barrels of wine. Okay, so basically makes life impossible for him. So you shadow them and you walk in, and you shadow them and you walk out. Okay. Yeah, 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Now, what does this tell me? The guy is allowed to break the barrels. What does that say? It says oven inishtino l'nafshay. A person is able to judge, to act as his own judge, take matters into his own hands. Because he doesn't go to court, he just breaks the barrels. So Rav Nachman says this is not a proof that it's permitted to be vigilante. We're not talking about to leave the property. To leave the property, you're not entitled to leave. You're stuck, sort of, and you have to go to courts. But when court calls you, you have to be able to go to courts, and that is already potential loss. If it's potential loss, then everyone agrees you're allowed to be a vigilante and just sort of shatter your way in, shatter your way out. Together on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
The miss is gonna be.
Yeah, I was thinking that also. Especially if it's honey. It's like Tashma, maybe there's honey and wine mixed together, so we can wash the honey with the wine. Yeah, Tashma, minayla nirtza shekola yomov. Okay, you have a nirtza, a guy whose ear was drilled. It's time for him. It's yovel now. He has to leave the bondage, the slavery. Okay, Virabim. 1 second. Yeah, and the master is sort of pressuring the guy to leave, but the guy doesn't want to leave. So what happened? As the master is pressuring the guy to leave, he pushed him a little too hard, and the guy fell down. He was literally pushing him out the door, and as you can imagine, when these type of things happen, he fell down and he hurt himself. Does the master have to pay for the damages? Also by chabura, he got hurt. Shu potter, the master is exempt. How do we know this? Talmud Leimar, lesiklu kaifer lashov, lesiklu kaifer lashav. Okay, it's a very interesting drasha. The verse is actually referring to going to exile for somebody who kills by accident. How do we get from there to basically allowing the master to force a slave out? Interesting, separate story. Okay. Anyway, what do we see clearly here? That he's allowed to be a vigilante, right? He has a slave who's supposed to go. He doesn't want to go, so he pushes him out, literally. And the guy falls down and hurts himself. Too bad. The slave was a robber. Gemara says, what does that mean? If he's a robber, then he's been stealing for the past 50 years. Whatever, not necessarily 50 years, but as much as 50 years. So, now he's afraid the guy's going to steal. So says, yeah, he is. Why? I didn't have the MC Rabbi Allah. Until now, he's afraid of the master. Why? Because if he runs away, what's going to happen? They'll bring him right back to the master. But now he could steal, run away, and what are they going to do? Go find him, sell him again. Not going to work. Too difficult. So therefore, okay. Now, since the slave is a thief, so there's an imminent potential for loss, and therefore we say, "Don inishtino nafshay," a person can be a vigilante. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, "We're talking about a slave who has handed their. We're talking here about a slave whose master has given him a maidservant to marry, and ada idno hetera v'hash isura. While a Jewish slave is permitted to marry a maidservant, who's not a Jewish slave, meaning an Eved Ivri.
Okay.
That's somebody who was a regular Jew, then sold as a slave, is permitted to marry a Shifra Kananis, a maidservant who was born a slave. Okay, so he has one. So the master gave him a Shifra Kananis, and he fell in love with her, and he doesn't want to leave. So ad in the hetera until the day of Yovel, so he was permitted to marry her because he's a slave. However, now Bahashti Surah, now he's forbidden, and therefore the master is allowed to enforce the law by pushing him out the door. In other words, he has to leave the maidservant behind. Toshma So our mission: a guy leaves a barrel in the public area. Somebody comes along and trips over it. Fishavran, he breaks it. Potter, he's exempt. Time of the reason is because he tripped over it. Hoshavra, but if he shatters it, chayev, he's liable. Okay, what does that tell me? You break barrels in a public area, you're chayev. By the way, this is not like the opinion of Rava, which we saw previously. Deliberately breaks barrels where they have no right to be. In other words, in English, you call this vigilante, right? The guy had no right. Go to court, call the cops, call the highway patrol, whatever it is. Why are you taking care of it on your own? 1 second. Okay, what do we see from here? The fact that the guy who breaks is obligated to pay tells us that it is not permitted to be a vigilante. You cannot be your own judge. Go to court, go to the highway patrol, take care of it with them. Don't go in and shatter it all on your own. Razvid says in the name of Rava, basically the same response that Razvid said earlier. The truth of the matter is that even if he breaks it intentionally, he's also exempt. Why does it say that he trips over it? chayav niska. The dafka niska. Avol shover loy. The who azik nafshay. Taniresha niska. 1 second. Truth of the matter is, even if he breaks it, so why do we use the word trip? Because at the end of you look at the end of the Mishnah. If the guy got damaged, in other words, the guy tripped over the barrel and and then he hurt his foot, so the owner of the barrel has to pay. This is only true if the guy trips over the barrel. If the guy shatters the barrel and trips over the shards, you've sort of caused your own problem. Okay. So the continuation niskal, so that's why the first part of the Mishnah also used the word niskal, he tripped. Okay. If you don't mind me borrow the Gemara for a second.
Sure.
Okay, Toshma Katsaisa is Kappa, Momen. So what happened here was two men got into a fight, and one of the guy's wives was with him. So she sort of grabbed the other guy by the pants and pulled down his pants. So Katsaisa is Kappa, you cut off her hand, Momen. You pay, she has to pay for embarrassing the guy whose pants she pulled down. Must be where there was no other option for her to protect her husband, except for this one. And yet she still has to pay. What does that tell me? It tells me you can't, if a guy's beating you up, you can't sort of respond. You have to run to court. Sigmar says, no, she had another option. She could have done something else to sort of get the guy off her husband. But she chose not to. She chose to pull down the guy's pants, and therefore she's obligated to pay for the embarrassment. Okay, so the Gemara says, but if there's no other way to save her husband, then she is exempt. So the Gemara says, if this is the case, look at the end of the Mishnah, the end of the Brisa. Okay, so the Mishnah says that the woman is the one who touches the aggressor, and she's chayav. But if it was the court-appointed emissary who needed to sort of grab somebody to bring him to court, literally grab him, then the court-appointed emissary would be exempt from paying. A messenger of the court is, if he needs to take action to bring somebody to court, is allowed to do so. He needs to put a guy in handcuffs and schlep him to court, that's fine. Okay, so the Gemara says, if it's the case, the woman herself would be exempt. If her only way to protect her husband was by grabbing the guy by the pants. So let's the Brisa should talk about just a woman. In other words, and it should say as follows: when is this Brisa true that the woman is obligated to pay, where she could have done something else to protect her husband? But if there's nothing else to do except for pulling the guy's pants down, then Petura, she's exempt. Why are we running to the exemption provided by a shliach bezdin, a messenger of the courts? We could talk about an exemption that's given to the woman herself, where there was no other way to protect her husband. So the Gemara says, you're right. This is included in the Brisa. The Brisa means to say as follows: when is this true that the woman has to pay where she could have protected her husband without resorting to pulling the guy's pants down? But if she had no choice other than to pull his pants, it says if she was a messenger of the court and she is exempt.
Did they wear pants?
What was that?
Did they wear pants?
Men for sure wear pants, yeah. Toshma. Okay, a guy has a public thoroughfare going through his field. So everyone used to walk down a certain path in the middle of his field. One day the guy decides it's too inconvenient. He wants to reroute this public area. So that's what he does. He reroutes it. Mashanasa nasan, the new route that he's given is now public property. But he can't reclaim the property that was his. See, he can't. In other words, you try to redirect the public domain. The new route that you give is public, and the old route is still theirs too. It's still the public. It's still public's. But if a person is allowed to be his own judge, let him take a stick and sit on the old route, and anyone who walks out, he'll beat up with a stick. He can be his own judge. He can hit anybody who goes on a path that he doesn't want them to go on. It's his property after all. By the way, it is his property. This is sort of like a public easement, where he sort of allows them to, but it still belongs to him. So if it's his. So why can't he sit with a stick and beat everybody up who goes in the old way? Ravit said the rabbis forbade this. Why? Because they're concerned the guy will give the public a bad alternative choice. Rav Misharsha Amar Rashi says this is not just a concern. That's actually what happens. So therefore it was illegitimate. Because the public had an easement right down his property. He decided to reroute them and took this inconvenient route that he turned into the public route. The public does not have to oblige to that, and therefore he has no right to sit on the original route and hit people with sticks. Rav Ashi says, very interesting argument. Anything from the side is considered backwards, like more difficult. Why? Very key argument here, major argument here. Because whenever you're talking about the public, let's say, for example, we decided to move the shul. Well, which way should we move it? Any way we move it is farther. The only question is for who, right? It's always going to be further for someone. So therefore, anything from the side is considered a longer route. It's always closer to one person and more distant to somebody else. If that's the case, why does he lose the property he gave? In other words, he provides a new route. So why is the new route? Why does he lose the new route? The new route could still belong to somebody else. I'm sorry. If the old route is still valid, why is then the new route should remain his? Go back to the old one and give me the new one. Gmara says Mishum Rav Yehudah, because the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. Amar Rav Yehudah, Meitzah Shachzika Barabim Asr Lekalakalei. If the public has once the public has access to an easement on a private property, then they remain with that easement. Can't take it away from them. Okay, I'll finish tomorrow. Have a great day.